Now, David, let's play a game. I open up my computer on the day. You know what the day is. The day Harvard sends invites out for interviews, and I open up the portal and I'm invited to a Harvard Business School interview. What's the philosophy of this interview anyway? Why is it done? What is the school hoping to get from it?
You know, I think a lot of people think the philosophy is so much more complicated than it is. And it's so simple. It is, they so want to get to know you. It's what, 900 to 1,000 people. And yes, that's a big class, but it's really personal. It's extremely personal. And it's another way of organizing the class. The resume shows what you've done. The application and the essays may give you a glimpse of who you are, but nothing replaces the person.
And what's more important? Poise and being articulate, or the actual content?
Well, so if it's a 2x2 matrix, that's the ideal, right? It's both.
Yeah, you want it all, of course.
That's the ideal. And of course, can't take the MBA out of me. I would take content over poise.
Interesting. Okay.
And the reason is...
I wouldn't have expected that, because I would also think you're looking really for, professional presence, which I would describe as poise and being comfortable and,
It is.
Yeah.
Dude, I mean, your content can't be great where your poise is like affecting it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So in the range
so one can't get in the way of the other.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So ideally both, but at the same time, in terms of you can have the greatest poise and presence, but if your job lacks depth and your path lacks depth, you have nothing to add to the class.
Right.
And it might be too rigorous for you.
Now, I'm not only walking into the office for the interview, you're walking in as well. So where's your head at? I know where my head is at. My head is, oh my God, this is my moment. I really can't blow it. It's so important to me. I don't want to call it scripted though. I want to be spontaneous, but I want to be prepared. But what are you thinking?
I am thinking, how do I give this person the best shot possible?
Really?
Yes.
Are you as nervous as I am? No.
I am so nervous. I used to literally I would get sharp pains running through my hands because there is a lot at stake for me too.
Yeah.
And the reason is I was in those shoes.
Right.
And you know that this interview can change somebody's life.
So you can really identify with a candidate.
Absolutely. Yeah. But also in terms of how hard they've worked.
Yeah.
To get to this point, not just professionally and sacrifice and educationally, across a lot of different categories, but also how painstakingly hard putting together the application is, right? So there's everything that leads up to the application, and then there's the application process itself. So just how much was involved to get to this point. And at the very minimum, I owe it to the other person to give them the best shot possible where they feel like they've done their best.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's what I mean by meeting the mark, right? Yeah. Meeting the moment. It's up to you if you've met the moment.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of my preparation is the same.
That's great to hear.
Is the same, right? In terms of the way I prepare for somebody from real estate is not that different from the way I would prepare from somebody from healthcare.
Right.
It's still the person. It's still, do I understand their job? Do I understand their community aspects? Do I understand, their goals and maybe some of the sacrifices they've made, the challenges that they've had to overcome? All of that is universal.
Now, you're coming across as incredibly compassionate. I wonder if all your colleagues out there who do interviews are the same.
Yes.
Wow.
And I would say in terms of there's so much intention behind it. Yeah. There's so much training. There's so much self-checking. Are we giving them the best shot possible? Are we doing and that's why that's the same philosophy that the PIR, the post-interview reflection, was created, right? It is everything to make sure you feel that you've done your best.
Yeah, that's really good.
And so that's the thing. That is universal.
Well, I love that because you're realizing the marathon that it takes intellectually, emotionally, and physically even.
Absolutely.
To get to this point.
And the reason is it goes back to, the section experience. Everybody who's there, even though some of my classmates and I, we don't think that now, but when we were there, a lot of them were like, how did we get in? And
do we deserve to be here?
Exactly.
The whole imposter syndrome thing takes place.
And it's more of, that's how much deliberation there is to be able to say, this person has something to contribute.
Yeah.
right? In terms of it could have been a work experience, it could have been something in college, it could have been their thesis, it could have been from community, whatever. And so what does this person actually have to contribute that is for the good of the section, for the class, for the community? I have to make sure I get the best out of them so that part can shine.
So let's get into the process.
Okay.
I sit down, you sit down, I say, "Hi, Devi," and then what?
So I usually had like a initial, like a minute, intro.
What would you say?
After the pleasantries, I usually say it's the fastest 30 minutes that you'll ever experience. Which is true because
True.
yeah, I mean, in terms of it's like everyone's like, oh my God, it felt like 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Probably no room for questions at the end. So they're not thinking, because it's not like other business school interviews or other job interviews in terms of, oh, what is the culture like, or what, in terms of questions that they have to memorize, that they often memorize for the end. I also say there are no right or wrong answers, which is true. This is a conversation. I always say, like, this is a conversation, not an interview, and that the intention is really to get to know you. And a lot of that is to put them at ease. And at the end, they really do say, wow, that really was a conversation, or you really did mean what you say. And that's what it's a way to make them feel a little less stressed and to remind them of the intention.
Right. Okay, so after that little preliminary warm-up,
Yeah.
What's the structure of the interview like?
Sometimes it opens with an open-ended question.
Like, take me through your resume.
Probably not that.
Not that.
And what I mean by open-ended is, where would you like to start today?
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Okay. In a way,
Sometimes
that can throw people off.
No, but it's also it's something like,
No, it's good.
yeah, it's a soft.
It's giving them control, too.
That's what I
A
mean.
sense of control, anyway.
Also to say, let's start with your greatest hits,
Greatest hits.
right? Like,
Okay.
maybe you really want to say, about that startup you started in college that didn't work out, but that turned out to be like such an amazing experience that led you to X, Y, and Z, right? Or
Yeah.
maybe it's your thesis
Yeah.
that you learned about whatever, right? In terms of, it could have been your latest promotion. Who knows, in terms of, or the reason you wanted to, the backstory of why you wanted to go into the startup. There could be so many different things. It's not designed to overthink it. It's a way to say, let's start with some of your best. It goes back to everything we just said in terms of making the person feel like they were getting their best shot.
Right. Now, do you come in with a set list of questions?
Sometimes. So I feel like a goalie, right? In terms of, like, if they score here, okay, I need to run with it. If they score here, what I mean by score, if they mention something about their work, I need to know enough about their job, the industry, the context, so I can,
You dive deeper with
that's
follow-up.
exactly right. So that's what I mean by score, not
Right.
like they're scoring against me or like their
No.
scoreboard.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to prepare this much.
Right.
So wherever they go, I can quickly understand, as opposed to saying, "Oh yeah, you were in what?" I will not waste their time,
Yes.
right? And so when I say I, not now, in terms of the interviewer, will never waste their time, because the interviewer shows up prepared. The interviewer knows so much about you, probably how you think, your industry, your job, your function. They know so much, so they have context.
Now, in some schools, there are so-called blind interviews where the interviewer hasn't seen the entire application. That's not true at Harvard.
No, they see everything. They see your recommendations. They see your entire data form. They see all your essays. They see your resume. You name it, they have everything.
And I would think that would make for a more meaningful interview anyway.
That's exactly right.
You have to do your prep as well.
That's exactly right. I have researched startups. I have researched their investors. I have researched, and if they say, I've worked on the largest, food transaction, I had that client and I'm like, oh, I know what that means, and so they tell you what they're working on without describing names and all that. Like if they were in banking or consulting, pretty much based on the transaction or the project, you pretty much know who the client is. So you can, or at least the industry, so you can research that too. So the job of the interviewer is to know enough context about this person, so to maximize the 30 minutes.
Can an answer be too short or too long?
There's this fallacy of, oh, I got to answer in 2 minutes, or this one is a 30-second answer, and this one is I have no idea. I don't have a stopwatch of like how long you are. That's judgment in terms of, you need to tell the interviewer of what's most important, right? I always coach people of like, you can't tell me everything, but let's start with the most important things. And then more importantly, it's the what and the so what, right? Like in terms of like, okay, so this project, and then did it grow into something? How did you grow? What did you take away? How did you impact the client? It's not just I did a financial model and I did this analysis and I presented it and I did a PowerPoint. Okay, and?
Right. Now, let's get into your head. How are you listening? And how are you judging and assessing?
Very carefully. I tell them I don't take notes. And the reason is I am so listening and I don't want anything to interfere, like, oh, and they said this and so I never take notes. So for the 30 minutes, there could be like the next room burning down and I am still so focused on, the interviewee. And I am listening for impact. I am listening for challenges. No job is like a straight line, right? Like in terms of no role is a straight line. Everything is a challenge and everything can be overcome. I'm listening also just like, can they speak in English? And what I mean by that is obviously it's in English, but in terms of can they take and distill something completely complicated into something simple?
Sure.
Right? If they are working on this complex, multi-party transaction that required innovative financing and innovative instruments, okay, that's cool. But are they so intellectual about it and so dense? Or can they say it in English? So that somebody who's not in finance, that their classmate who was in, marketing or healthcare or whatever can understand.
Yeah.
Right.
So your ability to clarify, explain in simple terms so that everyone in the room can understand.
Yep.
Which a lot of people can't do, incidentally.
That's exactly right.
That's a real skill.
I remember I had a client who was a Navy submarine engineer. I had no idea what that is involved, like what's involved with that. And so the preparation and the homework for him was, how do you explain something so complex and the mission that he was on without giving away national security, right? And taking something that technical and leadership, right? And to be able to say it to a civilian.
Yeah, I would say leave your lingo at the office.
Correct.
And don't use an acronym.
That's right. That is so simple. But the problem is people know how to speak to their colleagues.
Yes.
People don't know how to explain their job, their projects to a stranger.
Right.
And that requires practice. And that requires so much self-awareness of, well, how does somebody who's hearing me for the first time understand this? And that's usually people's biggest homework when they work with me.
Okay, Devi, what about what they don't say? In other words, are you reading body language?
A little bit. You can see when somebody lights up and when it's a topic, right? You can totally see that. Sure. You can also see when they shrink. Maybe it was a setback. Maybe it was a project that didn't go well that their recommender alluded to. And you're like, oh, I hit a sensitive spot, right? Like you can totally tell when it's something that they don't want to talk about.
What about something as simple as the way they dress?
No judgment there.
Come on. If a guy is an investment banker from Wall Street and he comes in with suspenders, are you going to be...
No.
Okay. And you're not going to make any judgments about it.
And the reason is that's their concept.
That's their uniform, whatever. Yeah.
The thing about HBS with 1,000 people, we need a lot of different people.
True.
And that's what makes it so special.
Now, can you really prepare for this? And I wonder to what length people actually go to prepare.
Yes, there are some extremes. Maybe we start with some of the extreme stories. There is I'm going to wing it, which I don't recommend. I mean, that is completely extreme and risky and, kind of reckless, in my humble opinion. And then there is the sincere yet intensive prep. It goes back to like, what are my blind spots? And that takes it's a level of self-awareness that you only get through repetition, that you only get through like drilling and everything. So some of the extreme cases that I've seen, and when I say extreme, it's more of like the hours, not the extreme as in process of like they're not, closing themselves off and going to a log cabin and not coming out until the interview type. That's, I don't see something like that. But I've had clients where they know that communication is an issue in terms of telling their story. They're really good at the technical analysis. They're really good at their job, but they literally have never had to explain their job to somebody else.
Right. And
they've worked on some really complicated transactions or projects, and usually multi-party, multinational, something innovative. And so we practiced for like 20 sessions in person. So I've been flown
20 sessions. I mean, 20 mock interviews,
Mhm.
each a half hour long plus feedback. Whoa.
Yeah, so I've been flown to New York. I've been flown to London to have intensive multi-day prep. And each time it is on me to come up with different questions and say, I don't understand what, like in your story, this piece, I still don't get it. What was the analysis? What was so hard about this? Tell me what you did. And then it's to be able to, like, like in painting, there's the whole concept of abstraction.
Sure.
Many lines or many to distill it down to like Picasso's dove, where it's just like one, a couple different lines and you know it's a dove. And so sometimes people are like, well, I did this model. What was the point of the model? Well, some people need that much time to unearth all the different things that they've done first, and then to be able to layer on, okay, well, that was the challenge. And they've never had to do that in such a complex, high-level way. Yeah. I would imagine they would have needed this time if they all of a sudden had a meeting with the CEO. Right? Because they're so in the day-to-day, so in the weeds. Right. And how you work is completely different than how you have to present yourself in this situation.
Right.
So it's a matter of, in this case, both individuals never had to present to a CEO type or to a C-level type. And this was the first experience that simulates that. And so we reduced to get them to that abstraction, but yet that's still high level.
Right. Now, in the case where you actually had to fly to London, your client put you up in a hotel?
Yeah, we're in the same hotel. Very nice. And he rented the entire boardroom.
A boardroom meant for like 30, 40 people, the two of you?
Mm-hmm. And then with the flip chart, and we'd go through like, this is
flip chart. You had flip chart?
Yeah. So I think of my job now in terms of at mbaMission and as both as a managing director and an interviewer in residence as I'm part therapist.
Yes.
Right? I am part professor.
Right.
And part coach. So they're like, well, we did this model for this and this. And I'm like, oh, well, that's actually a dividend discount model. Or that's dividend discount theory. Oh, I didn't like, and so so to be able to, teach them some of these concepts that they are actually doing, but because they haven't been to business school yet, they haven't understood maybe the theoretical side of it, or of like, this is a thing. Do you know what I mean? In terms of to be able to put it in context in a way that's easier to understand. And both of these individuals had such high level jobs with very little supervision. So they didn't have that layer of management that would teach them and coach them of saying, this is, dividend discount valuation, but whatever it was, so that they would have that. So I was kind of like their boss, because it was mostly about how to take something so complex and to make it as simplified as possible.
Right. Okay, Devi, this is the quickest 30 minutes of my life. How do I know I did well?
You don't.
There's no way to tell?
No,
I know a lot of people come out thinking, oh my God, I bombed it.
Yeah, and I think that's way more of the norm.
Yeah.
So first of all, if you feel like you bombed it, you're in good company. I have yet to hear people who say, oh yeah, I aced it. And honestly, it's usually those people who think that they've aced it that are like, no clue.
Right.
Unfortunately.
So you really don't know when you walk out of the room, did I do well or didn't I?
Correct.
And you will know when you get either dinged or accepted.
That's right. And I think it's very natural to second guess yourself.
Yeah.
And to know what the ideal answer in your head is versus what you've said. And not every answer needs to be 100% answer to be good.
Right.
Right. So it's like, I always say one of the best pieces of advice I always give is, if you feel like you've bombed a question, not that you actually bombed a question, but if you feel that you've bombed a question, just move on.
Yeah. Don't linger.
Right.
It's like when you play a bad note and you're a musician, don't be stopping and trying to play it again.
Yeah.
No.
Move on.
Because hardly anyone will notice.
That's exactly right. It's the arc of the 30 minutes. It's not one thing. Plus, when you prepare, you think you're preparing for the 100% of every answer. And it might be okay because of just the way the question's asked, or maybe the interviewer wants to move on because they understood and wants to move on to a different topic. That's okay.
Okay, Devi, what percentage of people who are interviewed at the Harvard Business School get an invite to come and be a student?
It's about 50%.
Right. And I'm thinking, what separates really the person who gets the invite versus the person who gets the ding? Sure, it's some of these other things, but I would imagine that at times it's very hard to separate the winners from the losers, to put it that way.
So like obviously the two extremes are really easy. The middle part, there's a lot of deliberation. There's a lot of deliberation. And some of the things the interviewer can say, and some of the things are beyond your control. If you're from consulting or, like overrepresented pools, probably a little bit out of your control, right? The few things that I look for is depth of experience. It's such an art. And you know it when you see it, when somebody has something that they can contribute to the class.
That's a big line, what you just said, because I know Dee, the former managing director of admissions at Harvard, would always say, I really want to know how you're going to behave in a classroom and what you really add to a discussion.
Yeah.
Right? That is so important.
When I was at HBS, I would often write, I wish this person would be in my study group.
Oh, wow.
And so, or I wish they were in my section. I want this voice in section.
Well, that's got to be the ultimate accolade.
Especially, when somebody has something to say.
Yeah.
Because they've done it, because they've seen it, because they've had to make really tough decisions, right? At the end of the day, business school is about judgment and knowledge. Knowledge you can get from a lot of different sources, but judgment is so, you know it when you see it, right? It's decision making, it's risk versus ethics, right? Like there's so many different dimensions to making good decisions. And what is the case study all about? How the protagonist makes decisions. Right. And so you can discern that in 30 minutes. Okay.
So is the interview all about disqualifying people or qualifying them?
No, well, and that's the thing. People who meet the mark is so obvious.
Because half are getting rejected after they get the interview, and you're that close. And you know you're fully qualified to attend because you wouldn't be interviewing them otherwise.
Yes.
Oh.
Just because you're interviewed doesn't mean your application was great.
Really?
Yes. Wow. There could still be holes in the application.
That's fascinating to me.
Yes. And it takes somebody with a keen eye to say, these are still holes in your application. And that is why you need to address this through your storytelling and through your answers in the interview. And if you still can't do that, some people may do a really good job of telling what they've done, but they lack the depth of intensity.
Yeah, right.
I had a client who worked in ed tech, and resume was fine, essay was fine. Again, everything was fine.
Fine, but not excellent.
Correct. And when he spoke about the actual projects and the types of work he did, it was still extremely entry level.
Yeah. Right.
I wish he would have applied like 3 years later.
Yeah.
There was no depth. There was no intensity. There was nothing somebody could learn from him. And mostly, again, it was more of timing.
He needed a little more maturity, a little more experience to draw upon.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's not a judgment call. It was more of like, he applied too early. And so that happens. But at the same time, when somebody was reading the application, there's probably something still very interesting about him, right? Just because you get interviewed doesn't mean your application was great.
Now, at Harvard, there's something called the post-reflection memo or something.
Post-interview
email, really, right? Yeah. Okay. So if I walk out of there and based on what you're telling me, I really can't tell if it went well or not. How do I approach that little email I've got to send you as a follow-up? Is there something I should be doing if I feel like, there's one point I didn't really nail, or just something that didn't quite go right? Do I even go there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
The nice thing is, just last year, HBS has a more concrete prompt, like what was the highlight and why was it the highlight? So you can see in all based on the application, based on the interview, and even the post-interview reflection, they're giving you reasons to, like, they were trying to give you as many reasons to stand out and to,
here's another shot.
Exactly. Here's another shot, right? At the goal. So they start with the highlight. Answer the question. Now they have a word count. I think it was 400 words. I think 400 or to 600, something. There's a range. If you feel like you flubbed up, then say, you know what? Upon reflection, I would have answered this differently. I was nervous. Just be honest and human.
Right. Good advice.
I mean, there's the interviewer saw it. 2 people probably saw it, right? So in terms of why don't you want to acknowledge that? It's the, arc of 30 minutes. It's not one thing.
Right.
Except if you stand up in the interview and pace.
So now you know what to expect. Don't waste your shot, as they say in Hamilton.